Greetings, everyone. I hope your day is going well, or your morning, your evening, whatever the case may be when you happen to be listening. This is your friend Pastor Mark bringing you chapters 9 and 10 of The Hiding Place. And by the way, if you listened to chapter 5 and 6, you may want to make sure that you've also listened to 7 and 8, which is on the YouTube channel page. I just wanted to mention that before we get started with chapter 9, because as I was looking back through my videos, I saw several views on them. And then when I looked at chapter 7 and 8, there were no views. And so I just want to encourage you to make sure that you've heard that before pressing on, and it might make some more sense. If for some reason you're having trouble finding chapter 7 and 8, or any chapter for that matter that you're looking for, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know, and I can text you that specific link to the chapter you're endeavoring to find. All right, let's have a little prayer, shall we? And then we'll get started again with chapters 9 and 10 of The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill. Father in heaven, we thank you this day for technology that allows us to hear these stories of your faithfulness and your love and your mercy and your strength in times that were very draining and troublesome and painful and cruel, yet your mercy continues to shine. We thank you for these reminders that, O Lord, you who the ten Booms served so faithfully yesterday art the same God which we serve today. And thus may we look to you and shine in the midst of anything and everything we ever face. We ask that you would help us to do this by your grace. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's begin now with chapter 9 of The Hiding Place.
Tuesday, January 6th, 2025.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading chapter 9 from The Hiding Place. When Father had put the Bible back on its shelf after breakfast, he and I would go down the stairs to the shop while Betsy stirred the soup pot and plotted magic with 3 potatoes and a pound of mutton. With my eye on income and outlay, the shop was doing better, and soon we were able to hire a sales lady to preside over the front room while Father and I worked in back. There was a constant procession through this little back room. Sometimes it was a customer. Most often it was simply a visitor, from a laborer with wooden clompet on his feet to a fleet owner, all bringing their problems to Father. Quite unabashedly, in the sight of customers in the front room and the employees working with us, he would bow his head and pray for the answer. He prayed over the work, too. There weren't many repair problems he hadn't encountered, but occasionally one would come along that baffled even him. And then I would hear him say, "Lord, you turn the wheels of the galaxies. You know what makes the planets spin, and you know what makes this watch run." The specifics of the prayer were always different, for Father, who loved science, was an avid reader of a dozen university journals. Through the years, he took his stopped watches to the one who set the atoms dancing, or who keeps the great currents circling through the sea. The answers to these prayers seemed often to come in the middle of the night. Many mornings I would climb onto my stool to find the watch that we had left in 100 despairing pieces, fitted together and ticking merrily. One thing in the shop I never learned to do as well as Betsy, and that was to care about each person who stepped through the door. Often, when a customer entered, I would slip out the rear door and up to Betsy in the kitchen. "Betsy, who is this woman with the Alpina lapel watch on a blue velvet band, stout around 50? Oh, that's Mrs. Vanderkookel. Her brother came back from Indonesia with malaria, and she's been nursing him. Corrie," as I sped back down the stairs, "ask her how Mrs. Rinker's baby is." And Mrs. Vanderkookel, leaving the shop a few minutes later, would comment mistakenly to her husband, "That Corrie ten Boom is just like her sister." Even before Tantana's death in the late 1920s, the empty beds in the Bayet were beginning to fill up with the succession of foster children who, for over 10 years, kept the old walls ringing with laughter and Betsy busy letting down hems and pants cuffs. And meanwhile, Willem and Nolly were having families. Willem and Tyne 4 children, Nolly and Flip 6. Willem had long since left the parish ministry, where his habit of speaking the hard truth had made a succession of congregations unhappy, and had started his nursing home in Hilversum, 30 miles from Haarlem. Nolly's family we saw more often, as their school, of which Flip was now principal, was right in Haarlem. It was a rare day when one or another of their 6 was not at the Bayet to visit Opa at his workbench, or peer into Tanta Betsy's mixing bowl, or race up and down the winding steps with the foster children. Indeed, it was at the Bayet that we first discovered young Peter's musical gift. It happened around our radio. We had first heard this modern wonder at a friend's house. A whole orchestra, we kept repeating to each other. Somehow that seemed especially difficult to produce inside a box. We began to put pennies aside toward a radio of our own. Long before the sun was raised, Father came down with a hepatitis that almost cost his life. During the long stay in the hospital, his beard turned snow white. The day he returned home, a week after his 70th birthday, a little committee paid us a visit. They represented shopkeepers, street sweepers, a factory owner, a canal bargeman, all people who had realized during Father's illness what he meant to them. They had pooled their resources and bought him a radio. It was a large table model with an ornate shell-shaped speaker, and it brought us many years of joy. Every Sunday, Betsy would scour the papers, British, French, and German, as well as our own, since the radio brought in stations from all over Europe, and planned the week's program of concerts and recitals. It was one Sunday afternoon, when Nolly and her family were visiting, that Peter suddenly spoke up in the middle of a Brahms concerto. "It's funny they put a bad piano on the radio." "Shh," said Nolly. "But what do you mean, Peter?" asked Father. "One of the notes is wrong." The rest of us exchanged glances. What could an 8-year-old know? But Father led the boy to Tanta Jan's old upright. "Which note, Peter?" Peter struck the keys up the scale till he reached B, above middle C. "This one," he said. And then everyone in the room heard it too. The B on the concert grand was flat. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting beside Peter on the piano bench, giving him simple musical quizzes, uncovering a phenomenal musical memory and perfect pitch. Peter became my music student until, in about 6 months, he had learned everything I knew and went on to more expert teachers. The radio brought another change to our lives, one that Father at first resisted. Every hour over the BBC, we could hear the striking hours of Big Ben. And with his stopwatch in his hand corrected to the astronomical clock in the shop, Father conceded that the first stroke of the English clock, time after time, coincided with the hour. Father remained, however, mistrustful of this English time. He knew several Englishmen, and they were invariably late. As soon as he was strong enough to travel by train again, he resumed his weekly trips to Amsterdam to get Naval Observatory time. But as the months passed, and Big Ben and the observatory continued in perfect agreement, he went less regularly, and finally not at all. The astronomical clock, in any case, was so jarred and jiggled by the constant rattle of automobile traffic in the narrow street outside that it was no longer the precision instrument it had been. The ultimate ignominy came the day Father set the astronomical clock by the radio. In spite of this and other changes, life for the 3 of us, Father, Betsy, and me, stayed essentially the same. Our foster children grew up and went away to jobs or to marry, but they were often in the house for visits. The 100th anniversary came and went. The following day, Father and I were back at our workbenches, as always. Even the people we passed on our daily walks were perfectly predictable. Though it was years now since his illness, Father still walked unsteadily, and I still went with him on his daily stroll through the downtown streets. We took our walk always at the same time, after the midday dinner, and before the shop reopened at 2, and always over the same route. And since other Harlemers were just as regular in their habits, we knew exactly whom we would meet. Many of those we nodded to were old friends or customers. Others we knew only from this daily encounter. The woman sweeping her steps on Koningsstraat, the man who read the world shipping news at the trolley stop on the Grootmarkt, and our favorite, the man we called the Bulldog. This was not only because we never saw him without 2 large bulldogs on the end of a leash, but because with his wrinkled, jowly face and short bow legs, he looked exactly like one of his own pets. His obvious affection for the animals was what touched us. As they went along, he constantly muttered and fussed at them. Father and the Bulldog always tipped their hats to one another ceremoniously as we passed. And while Haarlem and the rest of Holland strolled and bowed and swept its steps, the neighbor on our east geared for war. We knew what was happening. There was no way to keep from knowing. Often in the evening, turning the dial on the radio, we would pick up a voice from Germany. The voice did not talk, or even shout. It screamed. Oddly, it was even-tempered Betsy who reacted most strongly, hurtling from her chair and flinging herself at the radio to shut off the sound. And yet, in the interludes, we forgot. Or when Willem was visiting, it would not let us forget. Or when letters to Jewish suppliers in Germany came back marked address unknown, we still managed to believe that it was primarily a German problem. How long are they going to stand for it? We said. They won't put up with that man for long. Only once did the changes taking place in Germany reach inside the little shop, and that was in the person of a young German watchmaker. Germans frequently came to work under Father for a while, for his reputation reached even beyond Holland. So when this tall, good-looking young man appeared with apprentice papers from a good firm in Berlin, Father hired him without hesitation. Otto told us proudly that he belonged to the Hitler Youth. Indeed, it was a puzzle to us why he had come to Holland, for he found nothing but fault with Dutch people and products. "The world will see what Germans can do," he said often. His first morning at work, he came upstairs for coffee and Bible reading with the other employees. After that, he sat alone down in the shop. When we asked him why, he said that though he had not understood the Dutch words, he had seen that Father was reading from the Old Testament, which, he informed us, was the Jews' book of lies. I was shocked, but Father was only sorrowful. He has been taught wrong. By watching us, seeing that we love this book and are truthful people, he will realize his error. It was several weeks later that Betsy opened the door from the hallway and beckoned to Father and me. Upstairs, on Tante Jan's tall mahogany chair, sat the lady who ran the rooming house where Otto lived. Changing the bedsheets that morning, she said, she had found something under his pillow, and she drew from her market satchel a knife with a curving 10-inch blade. Again, Father put the best interpretation on it. "The boy is probably only frightened. Alone in a strange country, he probably bought it to protect himself." It was true enough that Otto was alone. He spoke no Dutch, nor made any effort to learn. And besides Father, Betsy, and me, few people in this working-class part of the city spoke German. We repeated our invitations to join us upstairs in the evenings, but whether he did not care for our choice of radio programs, or because the evening ended as the morning began, with prayer and Bible reading, he seldom did. In the end, Father did fire Otto, the first employee he had ever discharged in more than 60 years in business. And it was not the knife or the anti-Semitism that finally brought it about, but Otto's treatment of the old clock mender, Christoffels. From the very first, I had been baffled by his brusqueness with the old man. It wasn't anything he did, not in our presence anyway, but what he didn't do. No standing back to let the older man go first, no helping on with the coat, no picking up a dropped tool. It was hard to pin down. One Sunday when Father, Betsy, and I were having dinner at Hilversum, I commented on what I had concluded was simple thoughtlessness. Willem shook his head. "It's very deliberate. It's because Christoffels is old. The old have no value to the state. They're also harder to train in the new ways of thinking. Germany is systematically teaching disrespect for old age. We stared at him, trying to grasp such a concept. Surely you are mistaken, Willem. Otto is extremely courteous to me, unusually so, and I'm a good deal older than Christoffels. You're different. You're the boss. That's another part of the system, respect for authority. It is the old and the weak who are to be eliminated. We rode the train home in stunned silence, and we started watching Otto more closely. But how could we know? How in the Holland of 1939 could we have guessed that it was not in the shop where we could observe him, but in the streets and alleys outside that Otto was subjecting Christoffels to a very real, small persecution? Accidental collisions and trippings, a shove, a heel ground into a toe, were making the old clockman's journeys to and from work times of terror. Father tried to reason with Otto as he let him go, to show him why such behavior was wrong. Otto did not answer. In silence, he collected the few tools he had brought with him and in silence left the shop. It was only at the door that he turned to look at us. A look of the most utter contempt I had ever seen. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
Now, The Hiding Place from Wednesday, January 7th, 2026.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading chapter 10 from The Hiding Place. The slender hands of the clock on the stair wall pointed to 9:25 as we left the dining room that night. That in itself was unusual in our orderly lives. Father was 80 years old now, and promptly at 8:45 each evening, an hour sooner than formerly, he would open the Bible, the signal for prayers, read one chapter, ask God's blessing on us through the night, and by 9:15 be climbing the stairs to his bedroom. Tonight, however, the Prime Minister was to address the nation at 9:30. One question ached through all of Holland like a long-held breath. Would there be war? We circled up the steps to Tante Jen's rooms, and Father went to warm up the big table radio. We did not so often spend the evenings up here listening to music now. France and Germany were at war. Their stations carried mostly war reports or code messages, and many frequencies were jammed. Even Dutch stations carried mostly war news, and that we could hear just as well on the small portable radio we kept now in the dining room, a gift from Pickwick the Christmas before. This, though, was to be a major broadcast. We sat now, waiting for 9:30, tense and upright in the high-backed wooden chairs, avoiding, as if by a kind of premonition, the cushioned and comfortable seats. Then the Prime Minister's voice was speaking to us, sonorous and soothing. There would be no war. He had had assurances from high sources on both sides. Holland's neutrality would be respected. It would be the Great War all over again. There was nothing to fear. Dutchmen were urged to remain calm and to... The voice stopped. Betsy and I looked up, astonished. Father had snapped off the set, and in his blue eyes was a fire we had never seen before. It is wrong to give people hope when there is no hope. It is wrong to base faith upon wishes. There will be war. The Germans will attack and we will fall. He stamped out his cigar stub in the ashtray beside the radio, and with it, it seemed the anger, too. for his voice grew gentle again. "Oh, my dears, I am sorry for all Dutchmen now who do not know the power of God, for we will be beaten. But he will not." He kissed us both good night, and in a moment we heard the steps of an old man climbing the stairs to bed. Betsy and I sat rooted to our chairs. Father, so skilled at finding good in every situation, so slow to believe evil. If Father saw war and defeat, then there was no other possibility at all. I sat bolt upright in my bed. What was that? There it was again, a brilliant flash followed a second later by an explosion which shook the bed. I scrambled over the covers to the window and leaned out. The patch of sky above the chimney tops glowed orange-red. I felt for my bathrobe and thrust my arms through the sleeves as I whirled down the stairs. At Father's room, I pressed my ear against the door. Between bomb bursts, I heard the regular rhythm of his breathing. I dived down a few more steps and into Tanta Jan's rooms. Betsy had long since moved into Tanta Jan's little sleeping cubicle, where she would be nearer the kitchen and the doorbell. She was sitting up in the bed. I groped toward her in the darkness, and we threw our arms round each other. Together we said it aloud. War. It was 5 hours after the Prime Minister's speech. How long we clung together, listening, I do not know. The bombing seemed mostly to be coming from the direction of the airport. At last, we tiptoed uncertainly out to Tanta Jan's front room. The glowing sky lit the room with a strange brilliance. The chairs, the mahogany bookcase, the old upright piano, all pulsed with an eerie light. Betsy and I knelt down by the piano bench. For what seemed hours, we prayed for our country, for the dead and injured tonight, for the Queen. And then, incredibly, Betsy began to pray for the Germans, up there in the plains, caught in the fist of the giant evil loose in Germany. I looked at my sister kneeling beside me in the light of burning Holland. "Oh, Lord," I whispered, "listen to Betsy, not me, because I cannot pray for those men at all." And it was then that I had a dream. It couldn't have been a real dream because I was not asleep, but a scene was suddenly and unreasonably in my mind. I saw the Grote Markt half a block away as clearly as though I were standing there, saw the town hall and St. Bavo's and the fish market with its stair-stepped facade. Then as I watched, a kind of odd old farm wagon, old-fashioned and out of place in the middle of a city, came lumbering across the square, pulled by 4 enormous black horses. To my surprise, I saw that I myself was sitting in the wagon, and Father too, and Betsy. There were many others, some strangers, some friends. I recognized Pickwick and Tews, Willem and young Peter. All together, we were slowly being drawn across the square behind those horses. We couldn't get off the wagon. That was the terrible thing. It was taking us away, far away, I felt. But we didn't want to go. "Betsy," I cried, jumping up, pressing my hands to my eyes. "Betsy, I have had such an awful dream." I felt her arm around my shoulder. "We'll go down to the kitchen where the light won't show, and we'll make a pot of coffee." The booming of the bombs was less frequent, and farther away as Betsy put on the water. Closer by was the wail of fire alarms and the beep of the hose trucks. Over coffee, standing at the stove, I told Betsy what I had seen. Am I imagining things because I'm frightened? But it wasn't like that. It was real. Oh, Betsy, wasn't it kind of vision? Betsy's finger traced a pattern on the wooden sink, worn smooth by generations of Ten Boons. I don't know. But if God has shown us bad times ahead, it's enough for me that he knows about them. That's why he sometimes shows us things, you know, to tell us that this, too, is in his hands. For 5 days, Holland held out against the invader. We We kept the shop open, not because anyone was interested in watches, but because people wanted to see Father. Some wanted him to pray for husbands and sons stationed at the borders of the country. Others, it seemed to me, came just to see him sitting there behind his workbench as he had for 60 years, and to hear in the ticking clocks a world of order and reason. I never opened my workbench at all, but joined Betsy making coffee and carrying it down. We brought down the portable radio, too, and set it up on the display case. Radio was Harlem's eyes and ears, and very pulse rate. For after that first night, although we often heard planes overhead, the bombing never came so close again. The first morning over the radio came instructions that ground floor windows must be taped. Up and down the street, shop owners were out on the sidewalk. There was an unaccustomed neighborhood feel as advice, rolls of adhesive, and tales of the night's terror passed from door to door. One store owner, an outspoken anti-Semite, was helping wield the Jewish furrier. The optician next door to us, a silent, withdrawn individual, came over and taped the top of our display window, where Betsy and I could not reach. A few nights later, the radio carried the news we dreaded. The Queen had left. I had not cried the night of the invasion, but I cried now, for our country was lost. In the morning, the radio announced tanks advancing over the border. And suddenly, all of Harlem was in the streets. Even Father, whose daily stroll was as predictable as his own clock chimes, broke his routine to go walking at the unheard-of hour of 10 a.m. It was as though we wanted to face what was coming together, the whole city united, as though each would draw strength from each other Hollander. And so the three of us walked, jostled by the crowd, over the bridge on the Sparn, all the way to the great wild cherry tree, whose blossoms each spring formed such a white glory that it was called the Bride of Harlem. A few faded petals clung now to the new-leafed branches, but most of the bride's flowers had fallen, forming a wilted carpet beneath us. A window down the street flew open. "We've surrendered!" The procession in the street stopped short. Each told his neighbor what we had all heard for ourselves. A boy of maybe 15 turned to us with tears rolling down his cheeks. "I would have fought. I wouldn't ever have given up." Father stooped down to pick up a small, bruised petal from the brick pavement. Tenderly, he inserted it in his buttonhole. "That is good, my son," he told the youngster, "for Holland's battle has just begun." But during the first months of occupation, life was not so very unbearable. The hardest thing to get used to was the German uniform everywhere. German trucks and tanks in the street, German spoken in the shops. Soldiers frequently visited our store, for they were getting good wages, and watches were among the first things they bought. Toward us, they took a superior tone, as though we were not quite bright children. But among themselves, as I listened to them excitedly discussing their purchases, they seemed like young men, anywhere, off on a holiday. Most of them selected women's watches for mothers and sweethearts back home. Indeed, the shop never made so much money as during that first year of the war. With no new shipments coming in, people bought up everything we had in stock. Even the shop daughters, merchandise that had lain around so long it seemed part of the furniture. We even sold a green marble mantel clock with the twin brass cupids. The curfew, too, at first was no hardship for us, since it was originally set at 10 p.m., long after we were indoors in any case. What we did object to were the identity cards each citizen was issued. These small folders containing photograph and fingerprints had to be produced on demand. A soldier or a policeman, the Harlem police were now under the direct control of the German commandant, might stop a citizen at any time and ask to see his card. It had to be carried in a pouch about the neck. We were issued ration cards, too, but at least that first year, the coupons represented food and merchandise actually available in the stores. Each week, the newspapers announced what the current coupons could be exchanged for. That was another thing it was hard to adjust to. Newspapers that no longer carried news, Long, glowing reports of the successes of the German army on its various fronts, eulogies of German leaders, denunciations of traitors and saboteurs, appeals for the unity of the Nordic peoples. But not news that we could trust. And so we depended again on the radio. Early in the occupation, Harlemers were ordered to turn in all private sets. Realizing it would look strange if our household produced none at all, we decided to turn in the portable and hide the larger, more powerful instrument in one of the many hollow spaces beneath the old twisting staircase. Both suggestions were Peter's. He was 16 at the time of the invasion and shared with other Dutch teenagers the restless energy of anger and impotence. Peter installed the table radio beneath a curve in the stairs just above Father's room and expertly replaced the old boards while I carried the smaller one down to the big Vroom and Driesman department store where the radio collection was being made. The army clerk looked at me across the counter. "Is this the only radio you own?" "Yes." He consulted a list in front of him. "Ten Boom Casper, Ten Boom Elizabeth at the same address. Do either of them own a radio?" I had known from childhood that the earth opened up and the heavens rained fire upon liars. But I met his gaze. No. Only as I walked out of the building did I begin to tremble. Not because for the first time in my life I had told a conscious lie, but because it had been so dreadfully easy. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
Alright, and that will conclude this video for The Hiding Place, chapters 9 and 10. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.